Stories between us Anthology, where Black queer men's lives, love, and tension take center stage. They boarded in Miami with too much luggage, not enough patience, and were already sweating through their shirts. The line to get on the ship was chaotic. Girls in carnival wigs, boys in mesh and heels, couples arguing in matching tees that said, "Just married, but still slutty." You could smell 3 different kinds of sunscreen and somebody's cheap weed vape. Terrance wore gray nylon shorts, a cropped athletic tee that hugged his chest, and a crossbody bag slung low across his waist like a belt. Nothing was loud, but everything was fitted. Like he knew how to show up without showing off. Terrance was the kind of man who didn't just walk. He strutted, hips moving with purpose, thighs brushing with every step like they had something to say. Brown skin glowing, chest out, arms flexed just enough to let you know he'd been hitting the gym even if he still ate cheese fries in bed. He knew what he looked like, and he knew this cruise was built for men like him. By noon, we hadn't even unpacked, and Terrance was already on deck 5 in the spa lounge, flirting with a bartender who looked like a Disney prince in compression shorts. He skipped lunch, said he was saving room. Everyone knew what that meant. The ship had a room called the Blackout Room. That's what they called it on the itinerary, just vague enough to slide under cruise rules, but everybody knew what it really was. This is a gay, after all. The doors were blacked out. You didn't just walk in, you checked in. 2 men sat behind a small table, no uniforms, just some black polos and calm faces. You gave your room number, signed a waiver, took a condom, took off your shoes. Nobody said much. It was quiet, controlled. You stepped inside and left your shame at the door. Inside, there was dim lighting that made everybody look good until you got too close. House music pulsed through the floor, soft, steady, like a heartbeat you weren't sure was yours. Black curtains split the space into 3 sections. Couches for talking, semi-private rooms for whatever, and the dark zone where anything went. Terrance walked in like he'd been there before. He hadn't, but that never mattered. He peeled off his shirt, tucked it in his waistband, stretched like he was warming up for a basketball game. His cologne still clung to his skin, sweet and sharp. Sweat had already started at the back of his neck. That's how you knew he was excited. He scoped the room like a predator, but with charm. He made eye contact with a muscle daddy in leather straps. He smirked at a group of guys side-eyeing everyone by the lube table. But then he saw him. Tall, Dominican, chain resting on his thick pecs, low taper fade, basketball shorts and nothing else, standing against the wall like he owned the place. When their eyes met, something shifted. Not slow motion, just sharp and immediate. No words, just a nod, a silent agreement. Terrance followed him into the curtain like he'd been summoned. Damn, he was excited. What happened next wasn't fast. It was layered. He kissed rough with his hands everywhere. There were moans not loud, but low. There were other people around, but none of it mattered. Bodies brushed past them. Someone accidentally grabbed Terrance's arm mid-thrust. He didn't flinch. A dance track pulsed low through hidden speakers. Steady, hypnotic, like the room itself had a rhythm. Half the bodies moved in sync without meaning to. Terrance nutted once, then again, then fucking again. He lost his contact lens, didn't stop, and he didn't care. He took a break at one point, legs shaking. lying flat on his back while someone brought him a paper cup of water and an orange slice. The Dominican man was somewhere in the shadows, already back at it with somebody else. Terrance just watched, breathing and smiling. By the time he left, it was nearly 6:30 p.m. His shirt was wet. His legs hurt. His phone was at 12%. His ego, though? Fully charged. The hallways were quieter now, people napping, showering, waiting for the dinner buffet to open. Terrance walked through them like a king returning from war. No towel, no shame. Just skin still glowing and shorts barely clinging to his waist. A crew member gave him a look. He smiled back like, "Yeah, I earned this limp." When he got to the room, Adrian was laid out in bed, watching some food documentary with a bowl of ice cream balanced on his stomach. Julian sat in the corner, reading, headphones in, legs crossed like he was in a yoga studio. Terrance dropped his clothes on the floor, grabbed the half-empty water bottle from the nightstand, and collapsed on his bed. The air in the room was cold. The sheets were stiff. His thighs were sore in the best way, the kind that reminded him what his body could still do. He looked over at Adrian, who didn't even glance up from his spoon. He thought about that gold chain, that look, the rhythm, the way he wasn't asked to talk or explain anything, the way his name didn't matter, the way he felt wanted, not for who he pretended to be, but for what he gave in that moment. He grinned to himself, eyes half closed. Tomorrow he could do whatever he wanted, but tonight he was full. You've been listening to Stories Between Us. Adrian woke up hungry, not just for food, but for something that made him feel good without explanation. He didn't do cruises to party. He did them to enjoy himself. Slow, steady, no pressure to be sexy or loud, just peace and cruise ship food. He was the last to fall asleep last night, still buzzing from whatever sugary rum drink they'd given him on the deck. When he sat up in bed, the room was quiet. Julian was already gone. Terrance still face down in his towel, laying in bed. Adrian stretched, the kind of stretch that pulled from his thighs to his back. His stomach growled. Adrian was big, stocky, broad shoulders, soft in the middle, strong legs, round cheeks that always looked like they were holding in a laugh, skin smooth and dark, beard shaped like he kept clippers in his carry-on. He moved with ease, not slow, not rushed, just solid. He showered quickly, threw on a tank top and loose shorts, slid his feet into sandals and hit the breakfast buffet before the rush. Deck 7 smelled like waffles and fried meat, warm syrup, eggs that were a little too wet, fruit sitting in condensation. The line for omelets stretched past the juice station. He got in the line anyway. He liked watching the crew work, the way they cracked eggs with one hand, how fast they moved without ever making eye contact. When it was his turn, he asked for 3 omelets, shrimp, spinach, and feta, and one with everything. No shame at all. He found a window seat, sun pouring in, water stretching in every direction. He ate in silence, watching a couple argue quietly at the next table. One man kept pushing sausage links to the side of his plate. The other just scrolled his phone. Adrian didn't judge. He just dipped another piece of toast in his yolk and kept chewing. By noon, he was back for more. Not because he was starving, but because he could. Jerk chicken, rice and peas, mango slaw, 2 beef patties, plantains. He sat alone again, but didn't feel alone. People watched him, not rudely, just watched, like they weren't used to seeing someone so comfortable. A few nodded. One guy gave him a thumbs up. Another came over and said, "You really going in, huh?" Adrian just smiled and said, "Why not?" He flirted a little, mostly with the food staff. He asked about sauces. He asked about ingredients. One girl from the back kitchen snuck him a bowl of oxtail that wasn't on the menu yet. Said she liked the way he appreciated flavors. That made him smile bigger than anything else had so far. The ship rocked a little more in the afternoon, just enough to remind you that you were floating. Adrian leaned into it, took his third plate outside, found a quiet spot near the edge, and sat with his legs stretched, stomach full, shirt riding up a bit over his belly. He didn't pull it down. He scrolled his phone just to scroll. Then he saw it. "Hope you're eating good out there. Miss that smile." It was a text message from his ex, the one who never quite knew what to do with someone like him. His ex always said the right things, but never stayed long enough to mean any of it. Adrian stared at the screen for a full minute, then locked it and sat it face down on the bench. He finished the last bite of fried plantain and washed it down with a ginger beer that burned just enough to make him blink. There wasn't gonna be a reply. Not today. He spent the rest of the afternoon at the dessert bar. Sampled everything. Cheesecake, chocolate mousse, guava pastries, little desserts in glass jars. Sat at the counter like it was therapy. Let the sugar quiet the ache. By sunset, the light was soft and golden. Couples slowly danced by the railing. The DJ was playing something old school and smooth. Adrian stood for a minute watching two men sway against each other. One whispered something that made the other laugh. It wasn't jealousy, just recognition. The kind of quiet love that looked real. He didn't need it right now, but he knew he deserved it. He walked back to the room slower than usual, belly full, feet tired. The hallway smelled like sunscreen and cologne. His shirt stuck to his back a little. Inside, Julian was still journaling, calm as ever. Terrance was awake now, scrolling through photos he had taken to post to his Instagram eventually. Adrian kicked off his sandals, dropped onto the bed with a groan that came from his knees, and let his body spread out like a man with no regrets. He didn't say much, didn't have to. His eyes said enough. This trip wasn't about transformation. It was about permission, to feel good, to eat what he wanted, to take up space, to be soft and messy and satisfied. And he was. The next day, Julian was up before the sun always was. Didn't need an alarm. His body just knew when quiet was still possible. He moved slow, not sleepy, just intentional. He slid out of bed without waking anyone, pulled on the black silk robe he packed just for this trip, the one with his initials stitched in gold thread. It moved like water around him. He padded across the cold floor barefoot, grabbed his book and water bottle from the nightstand, and slipped out the cabin like a shadow. The ship was almost silent. Just the low hum of engines and the occasional distant thud of someone stumbling back to their room. The hallway lights were dim. Everything smelled like seawater and cheap cleaning spray. He liked it that way. Julian was tall, lanky, all clean lines and calm energy. Brown skin with a golden undertone, the kind of face that aged slow and eyes that missed nothing. His head was shaved clean, his beard lined up, and his toenails clipped and oiled. The man had standards. Quiet didn't mean careless. He made his way up to the adult deck, found the cabana he'd scoped out the day before, far left corner, partial shade closest to the railing, laid his towel down, fluffed the cushion, and settled in. He opened his book, crossed one leg over the other, and disappeared. That was Julian's gift. He didn't need noise to feel important. He didn't need to perform. While other people screamed their joy, he curated his peace. Each chapter, each page, a world he chose over the one happening around him. By 8 a.m., the deck started to shift. Staff setting up umbrellas. Boys doing thirst traps by the infinity pool. The thump of a remix bleeding in from another level, but none of it reached him. His headphones were in. His music was low. Something instrumental with just enough piano to keep his thoughts from floating too far. Late in the morning, someone sat near him. You didn't see him sit down, just felt the energy shift, a quiet presence, brown skin, locks, swim trunks, a calm posture, the kind that was very similar to himself. He looked up just once. The man nodded. Julian nodded back, then kept reading. They didn't speak, didn't need to. It wasn't about flirtation. It was about the rare moment where someone enters your orbit and doesn't try to claim it. They just share the air. Julian closed his book around noon. He went for a swim, let the water cool his body and rinse the weight off his shoulders. He floated for a while, sun on his face, arms stretched wide like he was willing to let go of everything. Afterward, he grabbed a towel, got a smoothie from the wellness bar, and sat down to start writing in his journal. He wrote about the moment, about the stillness, about how tired he'd been before the trip. Not physically, but emotionally. The kind of tired that makes your smile feel like work. He wrote about needing this version of himself to return home with. The rest of the day was soft. He walked the track deck in the late afternoon, sun dipping low, breeze starting to kick up. Couples passed him, singles too. Some loud, some desperate, some pretending not to be. He just observed. That night was the silent disco. He almost didn't go, but something in him said, show up, even if just to be there. The room was glowing blue. Headphones pulsed with 3 different channels. Some people danced wild. Others just stood, swaying, eyes closed like they were in church. Julian found a corner, put his headphones on, picked the slowest song he could find. Anita Baker. His body moved the way he felt. He danced like nobody owed him anything. At some point, he saw Terrance enter the room, his shirt unbuttoned, chest out, already lip-syncing to whatever pop banger was playing. He saw Adrian, too. He was sipping from a cup, barely moving, but smiling wide. Julian didn't wave, didn't interrupt his own flow, just kept dancing. When Julian walked back into the cabin, the TV was already glowing. Terrance was in his bonnet and pajamas, propped up with a bag of chips in his lap. Adrian had his legs stretched across the bed, holding the remote like he ran the place. Julian didn't ask. He just changed, climbed in, and pulled a blanket over his legs. They put on the same movie they always did and proceeded to quote every line. Laughed before the funny parts even came. Adrian pretended not to cry at the end like always. Terrance talked through the credits. Julian just sat there with a full belly. It wasn't deep, but it was friendship. Just them in pajamas on the last night of the trip. Soft, close, and exactly where they were supposed to be. By the time they hit the port, everything was sticking. Shirts, thighs, passports inside cheap plastic pouches. The party was over, and the line for customs was long enough to test any friendship. People were cranky, sunburnt, half of them hungover, the other half pretending they weren't. Julian stood tall in a clean white tee, fresh sneakers, sunglasses that somehow hadn't caught a single scratch. Calm as ever. Adrian was carrying a tote bag that clearly had stolen snacks in it. 2 croissants, a banana, and something wrapped in foil. He didn't even try to hide it. Terrance had on black shades and a limp he earned the hard way. Scrolling through his phone like he wasn't standing in a federal line. Nobody said it out loud, but they all felt it. The way the air gets different when something good ends. Not sad, just different. The silence that settles when the fun's behind you and real life's waiting in baggage claim. We shuffled forward inch by inch. People complaining, babies crying. One girl yelling at her friend about who hooked up with who. Adrian just shook his head, leaned on the railing, and said, "See? That's why I stayed with the food." Julian laughed under his breath. Terrance smiled like he was holding back a confession. Every moment from the last 4 days sitting right there between them. The laughs, the snacks, the sweat, the playlists, the mess, the peace. Terrance pulled out his phone like clockwork, leaned back against a pillar and said, "Hold still, y'all look crusty." He snapped a blurry, half-blinking selfie of the 3 of us. Puffy eyes, wrinkled shirts, no filters. Just facts. He dropped it in the group chat with one line. "Y'all ready for next year?" None of them replied. That trip was done. But the friendship, the one living in inside jokes, ugly pics, snack crumbs, and reruns they never finish, that wasn't going anywhere. That's the part that will last. There had always been an understanding between Jason and Elijah. Not one they ever talked about. Not one they even needed to name. It existed in the space between them, in the inside jokes no one else understood, in the way their friendship never quite stayed within the boundaries of what friendships were supposed to be. It existed in the nights when alcohol blurred the lines, when inhibitions dissolved, when waking up in each other's beds wasn't a mistake, but something neither of them had the courage to unpack. And yet, after all these years, they never fell apart, never talked about it, never let it get messy. Jason always had Naomi in the background, and Elijah always told himself he didn't care. But Jason had always been different. He was a trans man, but more than that, he was unapologetic about it. He carried himself with a kind of certainty that made people second guess whether they had misheard him. Never small, never unsure, never willing to be anything but exactly who he was. That kind of self-assurance had cost him. There had been years of fighting for space in the world, years of proving himself, years of pushing past every person who had looked at him and tried to decide if he belonged. And yet, Somehow, Jason still laughed the loudest. He still walked into rooms like they were built for him. Still flirted too much. Still lived like he refused to be invisible. Elijah had never told him how much he admired that. Now, sitting across from Jason, hearing the words, "I'm getting married," he realized everything was about to change. The bar was loud but not overwhelming. Just enough noise to make their conversation feel private, like they were still in their own world. Jason leaned back in his seat, relaxed, laughing at something Elijah said, his fingers drumming absently on the rim of his glass. Elijah took a sip of his drink, watching him over the rim, the same way he always did. He knew Jason too well, knew the difference between easy conversation and when Jason was gearing up to drop something big. Jason exhaled, rolled his shoulders, and casually said the words that shattered everything. "So, Naomi and I are getting married." Elijah blinked. He let the words sit there, waiting for the punchline. Jason wasn't serious. He couldn't be serious. But Jason just smiled. Not sheepish, not hesitant, but genuinely happy. Elijah laughed, but it came out wrong. Sharp, uneven. "Married? You? Since when do you believe in commitment?" Jason smirked. "I've always believed in commitment. Just never found the right person." And that was the moment. The moment Elijah knew he wasn't just losing Jason as a friend, as a habit, as whatever undefined thing they had been. He was losing him for real. Jason reached for his drink, oblivious, or maybe just ignoring the shift in Elijah's energy. "She makes sense," Jason continued. "It's just easy. I don't have to overthink with her. She loves me, she gets me, and she doesn't expect me to be anything I'm not. She knows everything, and she's still here. Do you know how rare that is?" Elijah stared at him. The words sat heavy. Because Jason wasn't just talking about Naomi. He was talking about himself, about his past, about the way he had spent years trying to prove to the world and to himself that he was enough. And Elijah had been a part of that, hadn't he? The blurred nights, the silence afterward. Jason had never asked for more, had never demanded more. Maybe Elijah had been another part of Jason's long list of reasons he couldn't trust love to last. Elijah forced a smirk, picking up his drink again. "And she's okay with our little extracurricular activities?" Jason chuckled, shaking his head. "Naomi's not stupid. She knows we've hooked up. I don't think she cares. She's got her own fun on the side." Elijah arched an eyebrow. "She told you that?" Jason shrugged. "She didn't have to. Open secrets work both ways." For a second, Elijah wanted to laugh. It was absurd, all of it. Jason dropping life-changing news like he was talking about a new restaurant he liked, Naomi knowing about their past but never addressing it, never calling it what it was. It was funny. It should have been funny. But Elijah couldn't laugh, because no matter how open the secret had been, it was about to be closed for good. Jason was getting married to a woman who knew everything, who accepted everything, who loved him for exactly who he was. It made sense. It was safe. It was certain. Elijah could raise a glass to that. He could toast to the wedding, tell Jason he was happy for him, play the part of the supportive best friend. But as he sat there, watching Jason talk about forever like it was a simple decision, one thought rang louder than anything else. Was this the end of their playful, not so serious romantic friendship? The bachelor party was louder than it needed to be, filled with too many people who barely knew Jason. Too many drinks poured by strangers who didn't care about anything but keeping the night going. Elijah leaned back against the bar, watching the room, watching Jason. He had always been good at this, slipping into whatever version of himself people expected. The charming best friend, the reckless party guy, the man who had fought for everything he had and still made it look effortless. Right now, he was in his element, laughing, drinking, celebrating like this wasn't the last time things would ever be like this. But Elijah knew better, because Jason kept looking at him. Not constantly, not obviously, but enough. Enough that it didn't matter how many people were between them, how many distractions Jason tried to throw in the way. There was an unspoken understanding between them, the same one that had always been there, the same one that was pulling them toward the inevitable. One last time. One last moment of ecstasy. At some point, the crowd started to thin. The party was still raging, but the weight of the night was settling, and Jason wasn't trying to fight it anymore. Elijah felt it before Jason even said anything. A shift happened, and a quick decision was made. A door closing and opening all at once. Jason grabbed another drink, took a slow sip, then turned to Elijah, voice steady, unreadable. "We should get out of here." It wasn't a question. Elijah didn't need to ask where they were going. He just nodded. "Yeah, we should." The hotel room door clicked shut behind them, and for a moment neither of them moved. There was no hesitation, no pause, no space left for pretending. Jason moved first. Or maybe Elijah did. It didn't matter. It never did. They grabbed each other with years of pent-up tension, hands gripping too hard, mouths meeting in a kiss that was all heat, urgency, and need. There was no slow buildup, no careful exploration. This wasn't about discovery. It was about knowing. Hands pulling at clothes, laughter tangled between gasps. Jason's voice half a curse, half a groan as Elijah shoved him against the bed, pressing him down like this was the only way to make the moment last. It wasn't soft. It wasn't hesitant. It was reckless, chaotic, the way it always had been between them. And underneath all of it, the sharp, undeniable awareness that this was the last time. Maybe that's what made it better. More intense, more desperate. Jason gripped Elijah's wrist, flipped him over, pushed back just as hard, their bodies moving like they were trying to make the memory last forever. And maybe, for a moment, it felt like it could. The room smelled like sweat and bad decisions. The sheets twisted beneath them, the air still thick with everything they weren't saying. Jason exhaled, staring up at the ceiling. Elijah let out a short laugh, breathless. Well, that was dramatic. Jason huffed, rolling onto his side, facing him. "Yeah, you're welcome." Elijah smirked, but it didn't last, because the weight of it was settling now. The understanding of what came next. Jason stretched, then sighed, voice quieter now. "I guess that's it, huh?" Elijah didn't answer right away, because they both knew the answer. "Yeah," he said finally. "Guess so." But neither of them moved. Elijah woke up to sunlight filtering through the curtains. Jason, already half dressed, standing by the window. For a second, Elijah thought about saying something. A joke, a comment, anything to break the quiet. But Jason just glanced at him, smirked like he already knew what Elijah was thinking, and said, "Come on, breakfast is on me." And just like that, the moment passed, because it was always going to end like this. The courthouse was nothing special. the kind of place where people paid parking tickets, settled disputes, and, apparently, got married on a Tuesday afternoon with zero regard for tradition. It was exactly what Jason and Naomi wanted. No stress, no months of planning, no overpriced catering or seating charts or extravagant nonsense. Just a few close friends, a city clerk with a monotone voice, and a legally binding "I do." And somehow, it was perfect. Elijah stood near the back of the small room, watching Jason and Naomi forge themselves together in holy or unholy matrimony, depending on how you looked at it. Naomi was in a non-traditional dress, something bold, something with color. Jason had thrown on a suit but refused to wear a tie, his forehead sweating like he barely made it here on time. There was no wedding march, no grand entrance. Naomi walked in with a cup of iced coffee in one hand and Jason's wrist in the other, dragging him toward the front like they were about to sign for a package, not commit to a lifetime together. Jason was laughing, shaking his head. "You could have at least pretended to be emotional." Naomi scoffed. "I'm emotional about this oat milk situation, babe. They barely put any in my damn coffee." The small group of guests chuckled. Even the courthouse clerk looked amused, flipping through the paperwork with zero urgency. It was casual, unconventional, absolutely, unapologetically them. And Elijah hated how much he loved it. Jason turned slightly, scanning the room, and for the briefest second, their eyes met. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a plea. It was just a friendly recognition, a quiet understanding, a final acknowledgement of everything that had led to this moment. Elijah held his gaze for a breath, then gave him the smallest nod. Jason exhaled, this moment easing his shoulders, and then he turned back to Naomi, grinning as the clerk cleared his throat and started reading off the legal formalities. The ceremony was quick, nothing poetic or overly sentimental. The "I do" came without hesitation. The rings slipped on with zero theatrics. And when the clerk finally said, "I now pronounce you legally married," Jason dipped Naomi so dramatically she almost dropped her coffee. The laughter echoed through the courthouse hallways. The newlyweds kissed, pulled apart, then immediately turned toward the exit like they had a flight to catch. "All right," Naomi announced, clapping her hands together. "Can we eat now?" "I'm starving." Elijah didn't stop Jason on the way out, didn't pull him aside, didn't say anything dramatic or messy or selfish. Instead, as Jason and Naomi passed by, Jason slowed just enough to reach out. Just for a second. Just enough for his hand to brush Elijah's arm in a silent acknowledgement. And then, just like that, he was gone. Outside, the afternoon was bright. Too warm for a wedding. Too normal for a day that felt like an ending. Elijah stood on the courthouse steps, hands in his pockets, watching as Jason and Naomi disappeared into the city, laughing like they had all the time in the world. Maybe they did. Elijah took a slow breath and finally let go, because maybe, just maybe, it was time for him to figure out what came next, too. Some things aren't easy to admit. Not to your partner, not to yourself. But once you say it out loud, once the words leave your mouth, there's no taking them back. There's no pretending things can stay the same. Nico had always known what he wanted, or at least he thought he did. A committed relationship, stability, love without conditions. And for the most part, he had it. He and Andre had spent years building something real, solid, steady, the kind of relationship people envied. But some desires don't disappear just because you ignore them. So when the need became too strong to suppress, When the craving for something he couldn't ask Andre for became impossible to shake, they had made an agreement, a compromise. Nico would get what he needed elsewhere. Just once, just to get it out of his system. And now, here he was, sitting in his therapist's office, trying to understand what it all meant. The room was bathed in soft light, the kind designed to make people feel safe. Neutral-toned furniture, warm wood, plants placed in corners with quiet intention. A faint scent of bergamot lingered in the air, subtle, calming, something carefully chosen to make the mind settle. Most people wouldn't notice, but Nico did. He exhaled, sinking further into the couch, his fingers resting lightly on his knee. Across from him, his therapist sat with an easy posture, legs crossed, a notepad balanced on one knee. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It stretched, waiting for him to speak, giving him space to gather his thoughts. He had gone through with it. The experience he had planned. The one they had talked about in previous sessions. The one that had been sitting on the edge of his mind for months. And now that it was over, he wasn't quite sure how to describe what it left behind. There was no tension in his jaw today, no tightness coiling in his shoulders. His body still felt warm, loose in a way that felt foreign. He could tell his therapist noticed. He noticed it too. The way something had shifted inside of him, the way his body carried itself differently now. The question wasn't asked aloud, but he could feel it lingering in the room. How was it? He let out a slow breath, rolling his shoulders back, as if trying to shake loose the memory that had already settled deep in his muscles. It had been different. Not in the way he had expected, not in the way he had planned, but in the way it unraveled something inside of him. He had thought he would focus on the logistics of it, the process, the structure, the methodical control of the experience. But what stayed with him wasn't the mechanics. It was the feeling, the way he had let go, the way he had, for the first time in a long time, stopped holding himself together. The therapist didn't push for an explanation. There was no need. The answer was already there, hovering in the space between them, in the way his breathing had shifted, in the way his fingers flexed subtly against his knee. Nico inhaled deeply, steady and slow. And then, finally, he let himself go back. The room of the therapist's office faded around him. As he recalled his experience to the therapist, his mind went back into his memories. The scent of bergamot in the therapist's office was replaced with something deeper, heavier, the rich, intoxicating mix of sandalwood and spice. His mind drifted, slipping effortlessly into the memory. The transition was smooth, seamless, like slipping beneath warm water. The cool, sterile atmosphere of the therapist's office faded, replaced by the slow burning heat of something more primal, more deliberate. The air inside the private studio was rich with the scent of sandalwood and spice, a blend designed to make the body relax before the mind even had a chance to resist. This was a space built for release. Nico stood in the center of the dimly lit room, bare feet sinking into the plush rug beneath him. The walls were dark wood, the furniture expensive, understated, positioned with precision. The heavy curtains muffled the outside world, trapping the low hum of anticipation within these four walls. The quiet was thick, heavy, charged with something unspoken. He was aware of himself in a way he rarely allowed, his pulse steady but deep, his skin hypersensitive beneath the soft glow of the room. Every breath he took was slower than the last, controlled, measured. But beneath the surface, there was something else, something winding tight in his stomach, something waiting to be unraveled. A presence moved behind him. The tantric masseur was close but not intrusive, watching with a kind of patience that only came with experience. His footsteps were silent, his energy controlled, the type of presence that did not need to announce itself to command attention. Nico knew this was just another appointment for him, another client, another man in need of something he couldn't ask for anywhere else. The tantric masseur had seen it before, had guided countless people through this same surrender. This wasn't about connection. This wasn't about desire. This was about permission, about the right to let go. The tantric masseur's voice came low, steady, carrying the kind of certainty that did not demand, only instructed. Take your time. Nico inhaled, controlled and deliberate, his fingers moving to undo the buttons of his shirt. The fabric slid easily from his skin, the cool air whispering over him as he let it drop to the side. His pants followed, the final barrier removed as he stepped forward, settling onto the massage table. The linen was soft beneath him, warm from the heat of the room. He positioned himself on his stomach, arms resting loosely at his sides, exhaling as he let the weight of his body sink into the cushion. He wasn't tense, but there was still something coiled beneath the surface. Something that the tantric masseur would find, would pull apart with steady, practiced hands. Oil pooled against his skin, spreading as the first touch came firm but slow, palms gliding down the length of his spine. The pressure was immediate, purposeful, a careful kneading into the knots at his lower back. The tantric masseur worked methodically, reading him, testing how much resistance his body still held. You hold tension in your shoulders, the tantric masseur observed, fingers pressing deep into muscle, unraveling it bit by bit. That's where you carry the things you won't say out loud. Nico exhaled sharply, his fingers flexing slightly against the table. He knew this wasn't small talk, knew this was part of the process. The tantric masseur was skilled, not just with his hands, but in knowing how to take a man apart, how to find what he refused to release and press until it had no choice but to unravel. The pressure deepened, rolling into his lower back, smoothing over his waist, moving lower, skimming just enough to make heat pool low in his stomach. The touch never lingered too long, never gave too much, only teased the edges of sensation, building something slow, something deliberate. Silk brushed over his eyes, cool and weightless, the blindfold settling into place. His wrists were lifted, guided above his head, wrapped in soft restraints. They weren't tight. They weren't meant to confine. They were simply a reminder. The choice was his. Nico didn't pull away. He didn't test the limits. He simply breathed, letting the last of his resistance slip from his fingers. The tantric masseur's breath was close now, near his ear. The warmth of it a sharp contrast to the cool oil still slick against his skin. You're still holding on, he murmured, his voice low, almost thoughtful. Let go. The hands moved lower, spreading over the curve of his ass, kneading into soft flesh, stroking, teasing, parting him with slow, deliberate pressure. A slick glide followed, something firmer, something pressing exactly where he needed it most, circling, working him open with patient expertise. His breath hitched, a quiet, involuntary sound escaping before he swallowed it down. The tantric masseur chuckled, a knowing, satisfied hum as his touch deepened, one finger then another pressing inside, stretching him, stroking him open in slow, indulgent movements. Good, the tantric masseur murmured, his tone carrying something like approval, like recognition. Let it happen. Nico couldn't hold himself still anymore. His hips lifted slightly, his body shifting into the rhythm of the touch, into the controlled, maddening pace that kept him hovering just on the edge. A hand slid beneath him, finding him hard, slick with oil, the tantric masseur, his fingers wrapping around his length, stroking in tandem with the movements inside him. The rhythm was expert, a torturous mix of pressure and patience, of pleasure drawn out to the point of breaking. It was slow, devastating, the kind of touch designed to pull a man apart and keep him there. The release built gradually, a deep, rolling sensation that started in his spine and spread through every inch of him. It tightened, curled low, a pressure so strong he couldn't contain it, couldn't do anything but give himself over to it completely. When it came, it was full, absolute, shuddering through him in waves, stealing the breath from his lungs, leaving him weightless beneath the lingering heat of the moment. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Nico felt empty in the best possible way. The tantric masseur didn't linger. He didn't touch him unnecessarily, didn't indulge in any unnecessary aftercare. The blindfold was slipped away, the restraints unfastened, a warm towel dragging over Nico's skin, wiping away the final traces of oil, of sweat, of everything else that had built up inside him before tonight. Nico pushed himself up, rolling his shoulders, flexing his fingers, testing the space inside his own skin. He felt lighter. The tension that had followed him for years had unraveled, leaving him in its absence. The tantric masseur watched him, eyes steady, face unreadable but knowing. He had seen this before, the aftermath, the moment of clarity. The realization that came after the body had finally been given what it needed. That's what you needed, the tantric masseur said simply. Nico exhaled, dragging a hand over his jaw before reaching for his clothes. He dressed in silence, grounding himself in the weight of the fabric, in the slow return to reality. By the time he stepped out into the cool night air, the world had started to creep back in, but the absence of everything he had carried before still lingered. And for the first time, he wasn't sure if he wanted to pick it back up again. The apartment was dark, except for the faint blue glow of Andre's phone screen. It was late, long past when he should have gone to bed, but his mind wouldn't settle. Nico had come home different. Not obvious, not dramatic, but enough that Andre noticed. There had been something in the way he carried himself, the way his body moved with a looseness that hadn't been there before. Even the way he touched him that night, absent-minded, easy, like a man who had let go of something heavy. It wasn't that Andre didn't want that for him. He did. But it lingered in the back of his mind. So now, hours later, he was lying in bed, scrolling through the shadows of the internet, searching for something he didn't even have the words for. It started as curiosity, a quiet, casual interest in what exactly Nico had experienced. He wasn't jealous, not in the way most people would expect. It wasn't about someone else touching Nico. It was about what that touch had unlocked. And then, somewhere between browsing articles and clicking through forums, he found it. A video of an interview. The title was vague enough to make someone look twice, but specific enough to know exactly what it was about. The Art of Touch. A tantric masseur on the science of pleasure and release. Andre hesitated for only a second before pressing play. The screen faded to a softly lit room, the kind of upscale, minimalistic setup meant to make things look both professional and intimate. Seated across from the interviewer was a man, tall, broad-shouldered, confident without being cocky. He spoke with a kind of quiet authority, the tone of someone who had spent years studying the body, learning its responses, mastering the art of control. He didn't sell fantasy. He explained technique, emotion, pressure points, breathing patterns. "This work isn't about sex," the masseur said, his voice steady but rich with something deeper. "It's about surrender. People hold so much in their bodies. Stress, trauma, desire, restraint. What I do isn't about taking. It's about guiding them to let go, to be fully present in their own pleasure." Andre swallowed. His eyes stayed locked on the screen, on the way the man spoke with such certainty, such ease, as if he had unraveled 100 men before his boyfriend. He should have stopped watching there, should have closed the tab and turned off his phone. But then the interviewer asked a different question. "So, do you ever find that people discover things about themselves that they didn't expect?" The masseur's lips quirked slightly, a knowing smile, the kind that said he had seen it happen more times than he could count. "Every time," he answered, the words slow and deliberate. "Men come to me for one thing, and often leave realizing they need something else entirely." The video played on, but Andre wasn't listening anymore. His mind had already gone somewhere else, somewhere deeper, somewhere that unsettled him in a way he hadn't been prepared for. The thought came uninvited, hitting him so fast he almost flinched. It wasn't about Nico. It was about himself. For the first time in years, Andre allowed himself to think about something he had buried long ago. A thought he had ignored. A curiosity he had let die the moment he chose monogamy, chose Nico, chose the kind of love that was enough. But now, lying in the dark, staring at a man on a screen talking about surrender and discovery and pleasure, Andre felt it creeping back in. And for the first time, he let himself wonder. What about me? The thought stayed with him. It lingered through the night, through the next morning, through the quiet moments where Nico wasn't watching him too closely. Then, 2 days later, it happened. It wasn't planned. It wasn't rehearsed. It just slipped out, casual, unfiltered, as he leaned against the kitchen counter over coffee. Andre had always been someone who thought before he spoke, but this time, the words fell from his lips before he could stop them. He thought he wanted to have sex with a woman. The reaction was immediate. Nico, mid-sip, choked on his coffee so violently it was a miracle he didn't pass out on the spot. His coughing fit was followed by a stunned silence, his wide eyes locked on Andre like he had just confessed to a murder. Andre braced himself, already regretting how he had said it. But before he could explain, Nico was staring him down, his fingers tightening around his mug as if holding on to it for dear life. It took a long, awkward beat before he finally spoke. He wanted clarification. Did Andre just casually wake up and decide monogamy wasn't enough? Did one night of Nico stepping outside of their usual dynamics suddenly make Andre reevaluate his entire sexuality? Andre groaned, rubbing a hand over his face. That wasn't what this was. It wasn't about labels. It wasn't about needing something Nico wasn't giving him. It was just a thought, a memory, something that had resurfaced out of nowhere. Nico listened, expression shifting from disbelief to curiosity to something unreadable. And then, To Andre's absolute horror, he started laughing. At first, it was just a small chuckle, but then it built, turning into something uncontrollable. Something that had him leaning against the counter, breathless with amusement. Andre wasn't sure whether to be relieved or offended. The laughter finally subsided, but the smirk lingered. Nico told him this was hilarious. Not the realization itself, but the fact that Andre had walked into the kitchen like he was announcing a change in cable providers. Andre rolled his eyes, muttering that he hated him. Nico just grinned, sipping his coffee. He told Andre that clearly that wasn't true. 10 years had passed. Life looked different now. Their apartment had changed, their routines had shifted, and somewhere along the way, their world had expanded. They had a child now, a sharp, curious little girl who had inherited Nico's attitude and Andre's effortless charm. The once quiet, carefully curated spaces of their home were now filled with soft chaos. Tiny sneakers by the door, crayon marks on the dining table, a rotating schedule of playdates, school runs, and bedtime stories. But somehow, through the years, through the shifts in identity, through all the ways they had grown both together and as individuals, one thing had remained the same. The first Saturday of every month. It had started as an awkward experiment, something neither of them had been completely sure would work. But over time, it had become second nature. Not a secret, not a struggle, just a structured part of their lives. Something they honored the way other couples might honor date nights or anniversaries. The bedroom was filled with soft morning light. The sound of their daughter's tiny feet padded down the hall, followed by the distant hum of a cartoon playing in the living room. Andre stretched lazily, arm draped over Nico's waist, body warm and familiar against his. He was already smirking before he even opened his eyes. "It's Kinky Saturday." Nico groaned into his pillow, exhaling dramatically. "Already?" Andre chuckled, pressing his face against Nico's shoulder. "You got your session booked?" Nico sighed, finally rolling onto his back. He did. The appointment had been set weeks ago. He asked if Andre had texted his date. Andre reached for his phone, scrolling through messages. He had, though planning a casual night out with a woman was significantly harder when you also had to make sure you weren't skipping out on bedtime duty. There was no tension in the conversation, no uncertainty. It was just part of the rhythm of their lives now. Years ago, they had worried about what this meant, whether they were making a mistake, whether it was possible to create something that allowed them both to have everything they needed. But now, it was just a small part of the bigger picture. Andre let his phone drop onto the bed, stretching again, completely unbothered. "You think we're really going to be doing this when we're 60? Nico mused, staring at the ceiling, half joking but half serious. Andre hummed, considering it. His smirk deepened as he finally murmured, "If my knees hold up." Nico laughed, shaking his head. "We are way too responsible to be this ridiculous." Andre leaned in, pressing a slow, lingering kiss to Nico's temple, voice warm with amusement. And yet, here we are. The sound of their daughter's voice echoed down the hallway, calling for them, breaking the moment. And just like that, they shifted back into the world they had built, their lives, their love, their family, and all the pieces they had made space for along the way. Thank you for listening to Stories Between Us Anthology. You can find every episode on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Rate the show and leave a comment. It helps more people find us.